Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. As rumours continue to develop on Adrian Newey's imminent departure from Red Bull, Mercedes seem to be trying to strike while the iron is hot and using now as their moment to get a meeting with Max Verstappen and his entourage and try and find a way to lure him to Mercedes, getting Helmut Marko, getting potentially Adrian Newey on board as well, in a bid to get Verstappen into their team on a potential €150 million per year salary. The Verstappen camp also seem to believe if that car was only a little bit better, Max is good enough that he could still potentially challenge for victories, if not even the World Championship. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We hit 49,000 subs yesterday. Love to see it. We've got loads of drama to get into. Firstly on Sainz. Helmut Marko, again, he's yapping about it. I will say, Helmut Marko was asked to comment on the Newey stuff and he declined. Can you believe it? So that might tell you something about that situation. But he does say on Sainz's Audi situation, I think he has a very great 3-year offer from Audi, but he has to make a decision relatively soon. I think it's mid-May that apparently Sainz needs to give an answer to Audi. However, Marko says, we, on the other hand, as Red Bull, we don't have to make a decision soon. Even he says they won't, because this is the thing for Sergio Perez. He's known to do rather well, let's say, during contract renewal time. The longer they keep Perez without a new deal, arguably the better he's going to perform, which means that, the whole Sainz situation is kind of called into question. At the same time, Sainz's team says, well, they're still playing the game. And given Newey's departure, which seems to be imminent as we'll discuss in a second, the feeling is that Red Bull are internally more unstable than they have been. Max's spot in the team is not necessarily guaranteed forever, and therefore maybe Red Bull think, actually getting Sainz now instead of him going to Audi might make sense given the alternatives that would be on the market if Sainz was to sign that deal. But speaking of the Newey stuff, we do have a couple of updates on this, of course, as well. And even Christian Horner has made a statement to this effect and basically said, well, it's all about the collective, which kind of implies Newey's departure isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all for Red Bull, and they are, in some sense, prepared to allow that to happen. Now, I'm sure they wouldn't, in an ideal world, allow Newey just to depart and go and join another rival team, which would compound the situation they find themselves in terms of the negative consequences of losing a guy like Adrian Newey. But at the same time, they might not be able to do that much about it, especially if, let's say, Ferrari came along with a lot of money to ensure that the gardening leave contract clause is reduced as much as they possibly can. There was also this yesterday from the race. I mentioned this briefly, but I wanted to just show the verbatim, just to show how, how clear they were, and Mark Hughes was in the article. It's not as if Newey would be departing because of a general malaise in the team either. This is very much a personal issue based around the Horner controversy regarding the employee who served as PA to both Horner and Newey. So I mentioned this yesterday because this wasn't known information until now. Well, I imagine it was probably known that the employee in question was PA to both Horner and Newey. Maybe the media didn't make this public at the time just because it would make it easier to find out who the individual was. That's the only reason I can come up with. But effectively, Mark Hughes is saying that it's not like the team from a design perspective is in turmoil and Newey's departing as a result. It seems like Newey is simply not prepared to work with Horner anymore after that whole debacle. And the implication of the article is this decision is purely personal from Newey rather than anything else. But of course, it's not ideal for Red Bull. How could it possibly be? And then Gary Anderson goes on to say that Mercedes nor Aston Martin, neither of those teams give enough, basically they're not good enough as offers compared to what Ferrari can potentially offer Newey, and that's why if there is one team that Newey would potentially go to, and even Aston Martin insiders have apparently said this, it's going to be Ferrari. There is, of course, another question on the whole retirement angle. Now, there's lots to talk about this in the comments all the time, and Joe Soward actually says this, F1 Giant, basically talking about the boat, this 90-foot yacht that he has commissioned here, Newey, and the possibility of him, circumnavigating the globe or whatever. But I think people should be careful to make the assumption that Newey will just, retire and go sailing and sit on the couch and watch Antiques Roadshow. Minds like Newey are not going to be able to switch off. When you're a genius on that level, when you're talented at what Newey's talented at, he's not going to be able to just turn off and live out the rest of his days. There's no way. Maybe he could even work with the FIA, help design the regulations. That's a possibility. But we know this guy loves walking around with his notebook, looking at the cars. That's the type of stuff he lives for. And I doubt that, sure, he's 65 coming on 66. I don't think that his days are over in that sense. He'll be designing something. That's just how this guy operates. So whether that's in Formula 1 or elsewhere, that's a question. But I feel like him just retiring and sailing off into the sunset is, I feel like, well, maybe that'll happen. But my characterization of these sort of individuals is that probably won't be happening. But I guess it's another question of, can another team offer Newey what he wants? Because he probably doesn't want to work on the Formula 1 project full time. That's maybe why he had a big role in the RB17 hypercar project. But maybe Newey wants to work on road car designs, right? And the feeling would be that, well, a certain team might well give Newey everything he wants in this regard to allow him to do as much as he would like to on the Formula 1 stuff and then execute elsewhere as well. According to Peter Windsor as well, now, his sources may be somewhat questionable, but he did talk about that Albon Red Bull thing recently, which seemed to turn out to be somewhat true, although it wasn't actually an offer. Basically, he said that Red Bull had given Albon an offer, I think, whereas the truth is we believe that they've told Albon, hey, we'll sign you potentially in 2026 if you give us first right of refusal. Not sure what there is to gain there from Alex Albon, but there was some potential truth behind what Peter Windsor said at the time, and now he's saying that Newey has apparently turned down an offer from Aston Martin. The rumour was that over the Saudi Arabian weekend, Stroll made Newey a big offer, and apparently he declines that one, which makes you think, okay, either he's going to retire or he is going to go elsewhere. And it's like I said yesterday, if he was going to retire, he might have just, ridden down his contract at Red Bull. But then again, if he finds it, untenable to continue working with Christian Horner, then maybe it does make sense that he would just call it a day now. But whatever you think, there's discussion on whether money is actually a motivation, which at this point it probably isn't so much. For some people when they're younger, sure, but Ferrari or Aston Martin can offer big money. There are other factors, of course, in play if Newey wants to continue to go and work elsewhere. And this is the type of thing that I was waiting for some reporting on this from the Italian press, because initially the reporting on the Newey stuff was coming from, the British media and the German media, which was, I wouldn't say surprising, but if Newey is to be linked to Ferrari and going to go there, you're going to hear something from the Italian media at some point. They were pretty much the first to talk about the Hamilton to Ferrari stuff, which of course ended up happening. And as soon as the BBC said it was happening, that was basically a done deal. Basically, this is the same thing as happened for Newey, right? The BBC are saying it's happening, as have many other media. But the Italian media, that would presumably be quite close to this, have not said that much yet. Although Gazzetta did say this yesterday, Ferrari are offering a potential super consultant role. Now, I think Newey would want to be rather heavily involved. I don't think he would want to just be like a consultant, but the term super consultant is certainly up for debate on exactly what that might mean. But the rumour is, and I don't know where they're getting this from, obviously, they could just be making it up, but we'll mention it anyway. Maranello's offer is said to be close to $100 million, euros, presumably euros, over 4 years. The goal is to get him working on the 26 car at the cost of paying the clauses. Start the new settlement, the new regulations with Newey's ideas. So that, of course, is the ideal. Like, we are in April 2024. In an ideal world, Ferrari can get Newey in, let's say it is Ferrari, but some team could get Newey by April 2025, at which point, ideally it's like January 25, so that he could work on the car from literally day one when they are allowed to, but even a few months in would be optimal. Red Bull potentially could keep him on his deal until the end of 26, then ensure that he has a 1-year gardening leave period, and then he could only start working in 27. But as I said yesterday, contracts are there to be broken by offering a load of money. And if Ferrari are as keen as they are to get some sort of a dream team together, they've obviously done everything Hamilton wanted to get him signed. If they were to do the same for Newey, they could theoretically come to a relationship with Red Bull where they pay them a lot of money, and as a result, Newey's contract clause is reduced somewhat. So presumably more meetings to come soon on that. Another meeting that is notable here in Miami is Andretti finally having a meeting here with FOM, because if you guys remember the story on this, Andretti reportedly received an email from Formula 1 management to say, hey, like, we're interested in having a meeting with you guys. Maybe it was from the FIA, whoever it was, interested, I think it was FOM, having a meeting to discuss your potential entry into the sport, and it went into a junk folder. They never saw it, never replied to it, and therefore FOM were like, wow, they really just, ghosted us or whatever, therefore, strike them off the list type thing. So that was pretty hilarious. But they will well of a meeting in Miami, obviously crucial for the ambitions to enter F1. Whether FOM are ever going to actually let them in as an 11th team, I'm not so sure. They really are pushing down this franchising route. Andretti's best chance, I would say, is to buy a team, and even Alpine seem like the most likely. But another major meeting which is said to be happening soon is between the Verstappen camp and Mercedes. If there is a time where Red Bull is the most sketchy it's ever been in terms of the future of the team, now is the time. And if there was ever a time for Mercedes to try and get Verstappen away, even for 26, but potentially even 25, now is the opportunity. Wolff has made it absolutely clear that is the intention of the team, and yesterday there was a very interesting report from F1 Insider. Now, are F1 Insider as reliable as AMUS, the BBC, Autosport, as we saw the other day? No. So take it with a grain of salt, but this to me sounds at least plausible. Whether Verstappen would go for this is another question entirely, but this is what the article has to say. So Ralph Buck puts this together here on Formula Insider, or F1 Insider, and he says the following: in the 14 days following the event in Florida, so the Miami Grand Prix, and the European Open in Imola, there will be concrete negotiations between Mercedes and the Verstappen team, consisting of the driver himself, his father Jos, and manager, of course, Raymond Vermeulen. As F1 Insider has learned, Mercedes F1 shareholders Wolff, Kalenius, who's now the CEO, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, of course, on the Ineos side, want to meet with the Verstappen clan. The Dutchman will then decide whether he wants to move to Mercedes next year. We know this is possible, at least we believe that this is possible, because sure, Verstappen's deal ends in 2028, but Marko is said to have entered a clause into Verstappen's contract whereby if Marko was to leave or to retire potentially, then Verstappen is allowed to leave. So Verstappen can effectively walk away from his deal whenever he wants, presumably at least, if Marko was to go as well. And maybe, well, we know this is quite clear for Max. He wants to be in a team with Helmut Marko, who is, I believe, 81 years old today. And therefore, if you want to get Max Verstappen, you probably need to get Helmut Marko as well, which is quite the storyline really after all the friction between Red Bull and Mercedes and, Marko and Wolff over the last couple of years. But there was a genuine possibility that Wolff wants to try and get Marko into the team as, almost like a Niki Lauda replacement in some sense, and therefore take the team forward that way. Verstappen first wants to see how serious Mercedes are during the talks, how much the team, which is currently struggling, is willing to make concessions for the world champion. It's not about the money. Much more important for him, he wants a guarantee that the Silver Arrow in 2025 will be better than this season. That's why he would like Mercedes to take over some important Red Bull technicians alongside him, which is another massive point. Like, imagine if Mercedes, they decide, you know what, we're going to spend some big money here to reinvigorate this team. We're going to get Max. We're going to get Marko. We're going to bring over some of the Red Bull guys. Maybe Newey. Maybe they could try. I feel like if Newey's going to go anywhere, it's probably Ferrari, but maybe Mercedes is a possibility. So Mercedes absolutely wants to get Max as the successor to Hamilton and is prepared to do a lot to achieve this. And this is when the money part comes into the conversation, right? Because Hamilton's salary of like 50 million plus a year is now available. They've made a fair bit of profit lately, and apparently they are looking to potentially pay Max 150 million euros per year. And they would get him into a long-term brand ambassador contract, which would tie the start of the team even further. So they would basically make every concession in the book here to get Max Verstappen into Mercedes. This was rumoured a little while ago. Now we've got more information on the situation that implies that they are willing to pull out all the stops to make this eventuality happen. Because maybe Mercedes feel like getting back to the top is going to be a massive challenge, but if they were to somehow get Max into their outfit and convince him that they're going to get more competitive, and as a result of getting Max, because, gut Red Bull from internally sign many of their guys as well in the future, and therefore, this would be crucial, I think, to Verstappen joining in the same way that Ferrari believe Hamilton joining, even if Hamilton isn't there for that long and maybe isn't still at absolute peak Hamilton levels, still an absolutely top driver will inspire many other talented individuals to join from the engineering side and is a signal of intent for Ferrari to get back to winning championships. The same would be true here for Mercedes. But and obviously we heard rumours as well that internally like 90% of Red Bull want this, or 90% of Mercedes employees internally would love this to happen. So Mercedes are apparently willing to roll out the red carpet. They're even ready to integrate Helmut Marko as a result of it. And the article goes on to say the chances of this are somewhat better than you might think, effectively, I think is what this implies. applies, emotionally, the decision has already been made. The Verstappen clan, certainly Jos, is vehemently against Christian Horner staying, but that seems to be happening. He has the backing of the tyre owners, and presumably this means for Helmut Marko. Insiders report the atmosphere is poisonous. The Dutchman now has to weigh up the sporting aspect. So, they're reporting that, Red Bull will part ways with Max. Like, Max doesn't want to stay there for that much longer. The question is that, given that Mercedes is the only realistic opportunity, he has to weigh out whether it's worth taking the effectively free championship in 2025 or whether leaving is an option, especially because the Verstappen camp believes and is confident that Max is just that good that even in a Mercedes that is, let's say, slightly better than this year, Max might be competing for victories, which would be potentially enough to satisfy Max if going into 2026 they have a very competitive machine that Red Bull might not have. There are rumours that Red Bull's engine project is not exactly on the same levels that Mercedes are, and if they were to be able to sign top engineers alongside Max, it might make a fair bit of sense. We know that a car is the most important thing in Formula 1. As good as Max Verstappen is, he's not winning the championship in a Williams, but, the driver isn't far behind in terms of crucial importance, and clearly, at least it seems, the Verstappen camp is so confident in his abilities that, he could potentially take that Mercedes further up the grid than it belongs. And look, it would be fascinating for the sport. Like, it would absolutely revitalize Formula 1 that is pretty dead at the moment, I'm not gonna lie. If Verstappen was in a Mercedes, if you had even Sainz in a Red Bull or something like that, and then of course Hamilton, Leclerc in the Ferrari, that would be quite the sight to behold for the next couple of seasons, rather than Max just running away with it every single year in that dominant Red Bull. But seems like Mercedes want Verstappen at all cost. Of course, the question that it's raised, and obviously this tweet is rather biased, but it does kind of get the point across that Hamilton was a massively integral part of Mercedes' success over the last several years. They declined, the board of Daimler, including the CEO that we mentioned a few minutes ago, to give Hamilton this ambassador role. Hamilton wanted a deal like that. The belief is that he wanted a 2+1 with some sort of ambassadorial future in the organization, and Mercedes said, no, we're not willing to offer that. We want to ensure that Kimi Antonelli has a way in and potentially Hamilton having a way out, in a similar thing to what Alpine potentially did with Fernando Alonso. Ferrari came along and said, look, Lewis, we'll give you everything you want. Write your number down on this piece of paper and how you want us to support your other projects outside of Formula 1. Ferrari did that, Mercedes didn't, and of course the rest is history. So, the optics, shall we say, of Mercedes offering Max a deal, and a far more lucrative deal at that than they offered Hamilton, is not necessarily a good look for Mercedes. Whether business is business, and that makes sense, is of course another debate, but it will be interesting to see if this happens. But fundamentally, Max will have to make a decision at some point. But even Horner has kind of implied that the golden era they're currently in is going to come to an end. He was asked the question on Max's dominance and says, yes, it's a golden moment for Max, and as we've seen with every other driver, it doesn't last forever, right? Which kind of implies that, well, you know what, Max could be gone, or, with Newey out, the Red Bull dominance wouldn't be quite the same as it could be, now into the future, right? So pretty crazy stuff that seemingly in the next couple of weeks, big talks will be held between Mercedes and Verstappen to try and convince him they are the right destination going forwards, and then all hell could break loose. I mean, let's be honest, if Hamilton to Ferrari and Newey to Ferrari actually happens, then you can't rule out Verstappen actually going somewhere else. Just before we close out the video, I wanted to mention this was kind of interesting, I thought. The Miami Grand Prix has sent a cease and desist letter to Donald Trump, or at least to a prominent Trump fundraiser. He was intending to use a suite at the Miami Grand Prix for like a fundraising thing. I don't really know what the typical rules are on this, whether, especially like election, let's say money raising, fundraising activities are typically allowed at these sporting events. I think ideally you want to keep that political stuff away from the track. But I think also IndyCar said that he can't do it at the 500 or maybe at Barber or something like that. So yeah, he's been trying his best. Obviously Trump down there in Florida, like, he gets good support down there. So I understand it from his PFE. Whether he's just going to turn up anyway and ignore the cease and desist, I guess we'll see. But apparently he was meant to be there. So I thought that was an interesting update to say the least. But very much interested your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.